To Thomas Balch Library. My name is Laura Christensen. I'm the director of the library, and I'm so pleased to see so many people have come out for our wonderful brief history of the town of Leesburg. It's great to see so many people interested in the history of our town. We're very lucky today to have an extremely knowledgeable presenter. Betsy Arnett had a career of more than 20 years with the town of Leesburg, and lucky for her, she has the wonderful thing of retiring. So I'm envious. But she brings with her great knowledge of the history of the area, as well as a background in public history. We share a master's degree in public history from the University of South Carolina. And Betsy has worked on numerous projects in Leesburg, Loudoun, and throughout the Northern Virginia area, and Clark County as well, related to preserving the history of the past and understanding it. So she is a wonderful person to give this presentation. I do want to plug a couple other things really quickly, if Betsy doesn't mind. So this is sort of our first fall program. We don't have a program season per se, but we're getting ready to kick off a busy September. So this Friday, if you're interested in local history and you're downtown for First Friday, stop by the Donaldson Cabin, where you can learn about local pharmacies and apothecaries. And if you like a little true crime, we're mixing in a little bit of that as well. So come learn about drugstores and things like that in town. Coming up on the 20th, we're very excited to try something new here. It's called Discovering the Past. It's a literary festival, so we'll be talking to panels of authors. In the morning, you can come hear a panel of writers of fiction who use archives and libraries in their research. And in the afternoon, a panel of nonfiction writers, people who do like narrative nonfiction. We'll also have a chance, if you're interested, to ask questions and learn about the writing process. So hope to show up for that. In October, we're also very pleased to be hosting the Shenandoah Valley Archives Fair. This is an event that started about 9 years ago, and it's your chance to talk to archivists from about 15 libraries, archives, and museums from as far away as like Rockingham County, Harrisonburg, places like that, as well as more locally. So if you have genealogy in the Valley or you're just curious about archives, it's a great chance to talk to a lot of people at once. So that'll be here on October 8th. But I don't want to stand in the way of great history, so I turn it over to Betsy. Thank you so much.
There are two seats right down front. You'd like. Well, thank you, Laura, for that kind introduction. And thank you all for joining me this morning. This is a labor of love for me to do this presentation, to come back to Leesburg and do this presentation. So as we go through, if you have any questions, please just go ahead and raise your hand. I don't mind being interrupted because it's going to be easier for you than to try to remember what your question was at the end. And the same with, we have some folks online who are joining us. And so Anna may be over there wildly waving her hands to get my attention. So anyway, so let's begin. So if this works.
You gotta touch the screen.
There we go. Nope. I don't know what I did. There we go. Okay. Early history of this area. Obviously, this area was inhabited by native people before Europeans moved in. And the native inhabitants of this area included members of the Algonquian and Siouan nations who became part of the Five Nations of the Iroquois. The first record of an encounter between whites and Native Americans in the interior of what is today Loudoun County took place in 1699. Two plantation owners from what is now Stafford County, Burr Harrison and Giles Vandercastle, came up to this area at the request of the colonial governor to kind of scope things out. And they had an encounter, a meeting with members of the Piscataway tribe. And Mr. Harrison recorded that meeting in his diary. This is a modern painting by William Woodward, imagining what that encounter may have looked like. So the Piscataways were originally from Maryland and had been pushed south by white settlement. But this was the first written record of an encounter between whites and natives. I'm sure that there were earlier encounters, just nobody recorded them. So over the next few years, of course, Obviously, whites continued to move into this area. And then in 1722, Virginia Governor Alexander Spotswood, along with the governors of New York and Pennsylvania, signed the Great Treaty of 1722. It's also known as the Albany Treaty because it was signed in Albany, New York. But in that treaty, the Five Nation of the Iroquois ceded all of their land east of the Blue Ridge to the colony of Virginia. I think it is probably important to note that by this point in time, the Iroquois were, their population numbers were greatly reduced by smallpox. So the Northern Neck Proprietary, all of this area around Leesburg and as far west, going actually into West Virginia and then down to what we today call the Northern Neck, was part of a royal land grant known as the Northern Neck Proprietary. In 1649, King Charles II granted this tract of land called the Northern Neck Proprietary to a group of English noblemen. Now, the key here is that he wasn't actually King of England at the time. He was in exile on the continent. And this grant was part of his bid to get these English noblemen to support his effort to regain the throne. Now, whether the Northern Neck Proprietary played any great part in that is unknown, but they did in fact support him. He was indeed restored to the throne. The proprietary was described in the original grant as all of the land between the heads and the waters of the Potomac and Rappahannock rivers. Now, today, when we talk about the Northern Neck, we're generally just talking about that peninsula that sticks out from the coastline of Virginia between the Potomac and Rappahannock rivers up to about Fredericksburg. But in fact, the proprietary extended much further inland. But in 1660, Charles was indeed restored to the throne, and the grant was then legally recognized. Now, there were 6 shares of the proprietary. There had been, and Thomas Culpeper was the son of one of the original grantees, and he inherited a single share from his father. His cousin also inherited a single share from his father. Their fathers had been brothers. And Thomas then set out to purchase the remaining shares, which he did. So he ended up owning 5 of the 6 shares, and his cousin owned the last share. And in 1719, his grandson, Thomas Fairfax, the 6th Lord Fairfax of Cameron, inherited all 6 shares. He actually had inherited the 5 shares earlier from his grandfather. His grandfather had passed them directly to him when he died, but he was underage. He was not yet 25. He hadn't reached the age of majority, and so his mother had been managing the proprietary for him. She inherited the 6th share from her cousin, and when she passed, and in 1719, Thomas Fairfax came of age. So in 1719, he not only inherited the last share, but he also came into control of the entire Northern Neck Proprietary. Now, the colony of Virginia in about 1730, early 1730s, contested his ownership of, as well as the southern boundary of the property. So the colony of Virginia claimed that under the Treaty of 1722, that the Iroquois had given them great big portions of what was considered to be part of the proprietary. But the problem was that it had never been surveyed. So they didn't really know what the southern boundary of it was. The northern boundary, of course, is the Potomac River. The other side of the Potomac River is Maryland. So no question about that. But where exactly was the headwater of the Rappahannock River? And so what Lord Fairfax did in the early 30s is he actually came to Virginia. He spent about 2 years here, and he set in process the surveying of that southern boundary, and it took a long time. And so then, and he was here for a couple of years. He returned to England and spent the next 10 years waiting for the Privy Council of London to make a decision. And in 1747, they indeed found in his favor that he owned the proprietary by virtue of the royal grant, And they established the southern boundary of it. And the recognized boundaries included 5.2 million acres of land, right? So this is a modern map showing the boundaries overlaid modern counties. So you can see, here's the Potomac River. And then this is the Rappahannock River to here. This is the Rapidan River. And actually, at some point in here, it becomes the Conway River. And so once they had established the headwaters of what flowed into the Rappahannock, then they just drew an arbitrary line, not really arbitrary line, but they drew a line between the headwaters of the northern branch of the Potomac River to the headwaters of the Conway River. And this line is known as the Fairfax Line, and it still exists today, portions of it. It forms the boundary, still today, forms the boundary between Shenandoah and Rockingham counties, as well as a portion of the boundary between Hardy County, West Virginia, and Rockingham County, Virginia. So now, how did we get back there? Oh, no. Now, so from the beginning, right, the whole point of getting a royal land grant was to make money, was to build wealth. And so the Culpepers and the Fairfaxes saw this land grant as a source of income. They established plantations that produced goods that they sold. They leased land and collected rents. They sold off parcels of it as well. And Lord Fairfax sold about 4,000 acres in the area of what is today Leesburg. It changed hands a number of times. With the owners mostly leasing out the land. It wasn't like this was a plantation here. Just by way of comparison, the current town boundaries of the town of Leesburg contain about 8,500 acres. So this was a little less than half of what is today Leesburg. But by the 1750s, a settlement had grown up in this area at the intersection of two very important trade routes, right? The first being the Carolina Road, which ran north to south, and the second being the Potomac Ridge Road, which ran east to west. And of course, these roads are still in use today. Anybody want to shout out what they are? 7 and 15, exactly. And anybody want to hazard a guess where, the crossroads, what intersection in Leesburg is the actual crossroads? Anybody know?
Okay.
No.
Is it Loudon and King?
Loudon and King. It's Loudon and King is the original crossroads in Leesburg. So by 1757, enough whites had moved into this area that the House of Burgesses realized that they needed another courthouse, that it was too far for people to go all the way to Fairfax to conduct legal business. And so they carved off Loudon County from the western half of Fairfax County, and they needed a new courthouse. So Loudon County was named after John Campbell, the fourth Earl of Loudon. He was a Scottish nobleman and an army officer. He served as commander-in-chief of the British forces during the French and Indian War. He also served as governor general of Virginia at one time. He apparently was not particularly popular with the colonial leaders, but he still got a county named after him. Now, Nicholas Minor was a tavern owner in this sort of crossroads settlement. He was leasing land from the then owner, John Carlisle, and he purchased 326 acres. He knew that they were going to need a courthouse and need a place for a courthouse. And so he purchased 326 acres of land, and he had a surveyor named John Huff subdivide that property, 60 acres of that property into 70 lots. And this is the original plan of, I'll show you a larger version in just a second, of his town, which he named Georgetown in honor of King George II, who was then the reigning king. And in 1758, the House of Burgesses did select Minor's Town as the location for the Loudon County Courthouse, but they renamed the town Leesburg in honor of the Lee family of Virginia. Um, so the patriarch of the Lee family was a man named Thomas Lee. He was a very wealthy landowner. He had died in 1750, right? But two of his sons, Richard Henry Lee and Francis Lightfoot Lee, were appointed as trustees of the new town along with Nicholas Minor. So this is a larger view of that original plan of Leesburg, and you can see that downtown streets still look pretty much the same as they did in 1758. In fact, Cornwall, Market, Loudon, Royal, and King Street all still have the same names. Back Street is now Work Street, but other than that, it's pretty much the same. And here you see the courthouse, where he designated a location for the courthouse. So if anyone ever asks you or says to you, so Leesburg's named after Robert E. Lee, huh? You can very gently tell them, well, Leesburg was chartered in 1758. Robert E. Lee was born in 1807. Did not gain any sort of level of celebrity, if you will, until the 1860s, more than 100 years after the town was founded. So no. Yes, sir.
In the book called Landscape Turn, read the story about the big battlefield Antietam.
Antietam.
They mentioned that Lee set foot into Maryland from Leesburg.
Yep, I will cover that in a little bit. So anyway, now Thomas Lee was indeed an ancestor of Robert E. Lee's. Anybody know great grandfather? Anyway. But yeah, I think it's great. I think it's two greats. So no, we're not named after Robert E. Lee.
But the family.
But the family, the same family, yes. But they were quite a prolific family, too. Okay, so Nicholas Minor now has 70 some lots to sell off in his new town, and he sold those lots with covenants in the deeds that required people to build substantial homes or buildings on those lots within a certain time frame, so that the house had to be brick, stone, or wood, at least 20 by 16 and 18 feet high at the eaves, within 3 years of purchasing it. And the reason he did this, so early accounts of the Crossroads settlement described it as being indifferently built. So we imagine that it was not a nice established town. They were just sort of ramshackle. And Nicholas Minor wanted his town to be a proper town. And if they didn't comply with these covenants in the deeds, the property would revert to Minor, and it did on more than one occasion. There are two of these covenant houses that are easily recognizable. There are more that still exist, but two that are easily recognizable in town, both on Loudon Street. So the old stone house at the top there, and then of course the bottom is the Donaldson cabin. Now the Donaldson cabin came very, very close to being demolished when the parking garage was built in the late 80s. It had been covered with siding. It was a dry cleaners building, and when they were getting ready to demolish it and pull the siding off, they realized what they had. This building is from about shoulder height up, maybe not my shoulder height, maybe somebody else's shoulder height, but from about shoulder height up is actually a reconstruction of this building. And in Nicholas Minor's day, the logs would not have been exposed like this. It would have been covered with siding, because to expose the chinking to the weather would not have been sustainable. They would have spent all their time re-chinking. So it would have had siding on it. Or some sort of cladding. There are other, yes, sir.
What kind of siding you think was it?
Some sort of, wooden clapboard siding. There are other covenant houses that still exist in the town, but it's kind of hard to see them because the buildings have been built around them. The Birkby House was originally a covenant house. And if you walk down Liberty Street, so the Birkby House today faces onto Loudon Street. If you walk down Liberty Street and look at the back of the house, you will see the original facade of the covenant house that started as. And that was a brick one. So So during the colonial and Revolutionary War period, so during the colonial era, the Church of England was the official state church, and it collected tithes or taxes from all citizens, regardless of whether they were members of the church or not. And any church that wasn't a Church of England that wanted to operate within the colony, they had to get permission from the crown through the colonial governor. And Leesburg and Loudoun County had significant numbers of these, they were called dissenters, these dissenter congregations. So Quakers, Methodists, Lutherans, Baptists, Presbyterians, they were all represented in Leesburg and Loudoun County. This is a photo of the old stone church. It was a Methodist church. And in 1766, Nicholas Minor sold a lot in Leesburg to a trustee of the Methodist Church, Robert Hamilton, for no other use but for a church or meeting house and graveyard. And this makes Leesburg home to the earliest known property owned by the Methodist Church in the United States. It is still owned by the Methodist Church. The Old Stone Church is gone, has been gone for a long time. You can still see the foundation of it though, but there is still the cemetery there. It is located on Liberty Street between Cornwall Street and North Street. And you can visit it. It is considered a shrine by the United Methodist Church. And there's some great information there if you're interested in going to look at it. By the beginning of the Revolutionary War, Leesburg had about 500 residents at that point. And in 1774, a group of Loudoun property owners met at the Loudoun County Courthouse, adopted the Loudoun County Resolves, which was a statement regarding the taxation issues that the colonies were facing. It was a precursor to the Declaration of Independence. And a lot of places issued these sorts of statements. The Loudoun County Resolves a copy was sent to the Continental Congress in Philadelphia, as well as a copy sent to London. And during the war, every free man in Loudoun from the ages of 16 to 50 was enrolled in the militia. And by the end of the war, Loudoun had stood up the largest militia in Virginia at over 1,700 men. So, so just some fun facts of things that happened in Leesburg as part of Leesburg's development in the early stages of nationhood. The Leesburg Volunteer Fire Company, which still exists today, was founded in 1803. In 1811, a new courthouse was constructed, replacing the original one that had been built in 1761. It's a photo of the 1811 courthouse. The current courthouse is the third one to stand on that site. In February 1813, the town of Leesburg was incorporated by the Virginia General Assembly. Prior to this, the town had been governed by a board of trustees appointed by the state government. Remember, I mentioned that Richard Henry Lee and Francis Lightfoot Lee, Nicholas Minor had been trustees. They had been responsible for the governance of the town. And, obviously others had been appointed after them. But the new government consisted of a mayor, a recorder, and a council, and they were all elected annually. Can you imagine having annual elections? John Rose, a man named John Rose, was elected the first mayor of Leesburg. During the War of 1812, in August of 1814, the British invaded Washington. I'm sure you've all heard this story. British invaded Washington and set fire to a number of buildings, including the presidential mansion. It was not called the White House at that time, the presidential mansion and the Capitol building. The Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and other important documents, including a lot of George Washington's personal papers, were from the federal archives, were loaded onto wagons and brought to Leesburg, where they were stored in an empty house on Wirt Street. Now, we actually have no documentary evidence that this happened, but it's our story and we're sticking to it. Maryland has a similar story, and there is also a competing story that the documents were stored at Rokeby, which is south of Leesburg. There's a vault in that house. I think they made that up. I like our story better. Yes, sir.
In this unofficial history month, does anyone have any idea how long this documentation was stored in Leesburg?
No, I have never heard any specific time frame.
Just make something up.
Until it's safe to take them back to DC. So, but I don't know how long that would have been. That's a good question. I have to do some research on that one. Early growth of the town. In 1814, the town limits were expanded, so more than doubled in size with an additional 105 acres. That town organized a lottery to raise $3,000 to pave the streets. In 1820, the Leesburg Turnpike opened, connecting Leesburg to Georgetown and the Little River Turnpike system. By 1830, the turnpike was extended westward, connecting Leesburg to the Shenandoah Valley. And in 1821, our first public water system was installed. So wooden pipes were installed to carry water from a spring west of town. Of course, it's not west of town anymore. It's like practically in downtown because the town has grown up around it. But the Rock Spring Farm, which is at the corner of Loudon and Dry Mill Road, a section in 2008, a section of the original pipe was discovered during construction, and it's now on display in the utilities department of the town. That property, the Rock Spring Park, is actually under a conservation easement, and so it will always remain a farm and not ever be subdivided into townhouses. There at Loudon and Dry Mill. It's the last remaining agricultural piece of land in town. Yes, sir.
Is it privately owned?
It is privately owned. But it is under a conservation easement, and so that is something that is a covenant that runs with the land. So the farewell tour of the Marquis de Lafayette, and I know that the Balch Library has been doing a big thing about this because this year was the 200th anniversary of it. But the Marquis de Lafayette, from August of 1824 to September of 1825, he was the last surviving French general of the American Revolution. He was one of the heroes of the siege of Yorktown. He made a farewell tour visit to the United States at the invitation of President James Monroe. So while he was here for, first of all, the November 1824 election in which John Quincy Adams was elected president. And then he was here in March of 1825 for the inauguration of John Quincy Adams, witnessing the peaceful transition from one presidency to another. And in August 1825, so 200 years ago, last month, he came and visited President James Monroe at his home called Oak Hill, just south of Leesburg. Oak Hill still exists. It's privately owned. However, there is an effort to turn it into a state park. So I don't know where those efforts stand, but the family that owns it has indicated their willingness to sell it and to sell it to someone who will to sell it to a public entity. But a banquet was held in Lafayette's honor here in Leesburg, which not only former President Monroe attended, but also President John Quincy Adams. And an estimated 8,000 people attended the celebrations on the Loudoun County Courthouse lawn at a time when the town of Leesburg was around 1,000 people. So quite a crowd. So the Civil War approaching. By the 1850 census, Leesburg had about 1,700 residents, about 1,100 white, about 150 free black, and about 150 enslaved. This is a map. This is the 1853 Yardley Taylor map of Leesburg. And so a couple of things to point out here. So we do have the Methodist Meeting House here. Here's the Presbyterian Church, still exists today. This was the original location of the Episcopal Church. It's no longer there, although the cemetery is still there. Of course, you see the courthouse here. It says Academy. It's hard to read. Academy. That is now it's now a part of the courthouse, but it became the clerk's office. And then here we have it says G.W. Ball Residence. That is Dodonna Manor. So G.W. Ball was a nephew, George Washington Ball was a nephew of George Washington's.
Excuse me.
Yes,
Can you
sir.
go back to that slide just prior to this one?
Prior to this one?
Yes, this one. Okay. No, that was the one with the population.
Oh, there you go.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, I have a question about the Lafayette's visit.
Uh-huh.
I was to the portion of Long County Street, and we visited a home that is on, is it Royal Street, the one that runs, that goes. I don't know, runs over the great cross, it crosses over King Street.
Well, Royal does cross King Street.
There's a home. And on the top floor, we took a tour of this home, and on the top floor, they had drawings and writings of some of the soldiers in the house.
It's Patterson House.
It's the Patterson House. Right, that's on Loudon Street.
It's on Loudon Street.
Right.
So those French soldiers that were in there, or were they, that were,
I-
that were staying there, or?
I don't know, I'm sorry.
Okay.
So to say,
She knew.
I don't know that I know right words, but definitely it was a funeral home that my father ran.
Uh-huh.
My father with Mr. Slack, Joy's father, and the soldiers really were up there and they did draw drawings, so beautiful. And it's really-
but are they Civil War era or
Yes.
Revolution? It's Civil War era.
And they thought that they were hiding and that they were up in the attic, but I think that was used as an ordinary.
It was an ordinary.
And so-
Yeah, it started as an
We
ordinary.
even connected all this, my father always said that Lafayette was supposed to have spoken from that porch because it's up high.
Right.
It was sort of an ordinary, so people, I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know that anybody's ever heard that, but.
I've heard that a speech was given by the mayor of Leesburg
So maybe he made
from
another
that
speech
porch
there.
and with Lafayette.
That's on Loudon Street.
That is on
Right
Loudon
next to
Street.
the corner of King.
Right.
It's a stone building. It's one of our special buildings.
Oh, yeah, it's absolutely, yeah. Absolutely.
So,
So, whoops, okay, so, in the 1860 presidential election, the constitutional union candidate, John Bell, received 60% of the vote in Loudoun County. And why is that? Why is that important? So the 1860 presidential election was essentially two separate elections in the North and the South. In the North, the contest was between the Republican candidate Abraham Lincoln and the Democratic Party candidate Stephen Bell. But in the South, the contest was between the constitutional union candidate John Bell. Sorry,
Stephen Douglas, wasn't it?
Stephen Douglas. I'm sorry. What did I say?
Stephen Bell.
Oh, sorry. Yes, no, Democratic Party candidate Stephen Douglas. Yes, thank you for correcting me. In the South, the contest was between John Bell, Constitutional Union, and the Southern Democratic Party candidate John Breckinridge. The Republican slate wasn't even on the ballot in the 10 slaveholding states. The Constitutional Union Party was primarily former Whigs who were opposed to secession. So Loudoun County was very clearly, a majority of Loudoun County was opposed to secession with their support of John Bell. The Union Party carried only three states, Virginia, Tennessee, and Kentucky. Virginia, Tennessee, and Kentucky. So all sort of the northern South. Yes, sir.
And the delegation for secession was led by John Jay.
Yes. So in 1861, Loudoun sent two delegates to the Virginia Secession Convention, John Janney and John Armistead Carter. They both voted against secession. However, the ordinance of secession was adopted by the convention. And a month later, Leesburg men, and I say men because of course women couldn't vote then, overwhelmingly ratified the ordinance in support of secession. So during the Civil War, many Leesburg men enlisted, mostly in the 8th Virginia Infantry or the 6th Virginia Cavalry. Germans and Quakers in the Lovettsville and Waterford areas formed Loudoun's only Union unit, the Loudoun Rangers. In May of 1861, the town of Leesburg authorized the printing of its own paper currency, known as dog money, because it had a picture of the mayor's dog on it. And by the end of the war, nearly $100,000 had been issued. Of course, it was not technically legal tender. But today it's really valuable if you have a piece of it. So the Battle of Ball's Bluff, the only really active engagement that took place in the Leesburg area was the Battle of Ball's Bluff, and it took place fairly early in the war, in October of 1861. So, of course, the war had started in April 1861, and through the fall, Leesburg had been occupied by Confederate forces under the command of Colonel Nathan Shanks Evans. And on the morning of October 21st, 1861, based on a faulty intelligence report, a Union scout, so the Union Army was camped on Harrison Island in the Potomac River, so in Maryland, and a Union scout had seen what he thought was an unguarded camp. And so the next morning, the Union Army sent a raiding party across the river to attack this camp that didn't actually exist. And what they encountered instead was a company of Mississippi infantrymen. So this is a map, and I know you can't see this really well, but so here is the Potomac River. This is Harrison Island. Leesburg's like down here. The red lines are the Confederate forces. The blue are the here, as well as some on the Maryland shore, are the Union forces. So Union Colonel Edward Baker arrived on Harrison Island and ordered as many troops as possible across the river in support of the raiding party. Edward Baker was a sitting senator from Oregon. He was originally from Illinois, had served in the House of Representatives representing Illinois. He was a personal friend of President Abraham Lincoln's. Unfortunately, there were not enough boats available to ferry men across the river, and a bottleneck ensued. And by the late afternoon, the Union began to retreat, with the Confederates holding the high ground of the bluff and actually firing on the retreating Union soldiers as they were trying to get back across the river. And a good number of them drowned in the river. So this was not a planned battle. It was a relatively small engagement, but it had huge impacts for the war. So first of all, just a tally here, a little over 1,700 Union troops had crossed the river, 166 drowned out of a total of 223 dead, 226 wounded, 553 captured. And one of the dead included Edward Baker. He remains the only sitting senator to die in battle. The Confederates had about the same number engaged in the battle, but suffered only 36 dead, 117 wounded, and 2 captured. But there were, as I said, major impacts for such a small engagement. First of all, the bodies of the Union dead, the soldiers who drowned in the river, floated downstream to, what's downstream from here? Oh yeah, Washington, D.C. And it really caused public outcries about the war, about the conduct of the war. The reports of the Confederates firing upon the retreating Union soldiers also caused a great deal of outrage. That's not acceptable conduct in wartime. The death of a sitting senator, as I mentioned. It was also the third consecutive Union defeat following the first Battle of Bull Run, as well as the Battle of Wilson's Creek in Missouri. And so it led directly to the establishment of the first Congressional Joint Committee on the Conduct of the War. The rest of the war, so in the winter of the following winter, 61 to 62, 3 forts were built on the hills surrounding Leesburg by the Confederate Army. So Fort Beauregard is completely gone. We don't actually even know exactly where it is. It's somewhere underneath Beauregard Estates subdivision. Fort Johnston is privately owned. The site of it is privately owned. And if you look at an aerial photo, you can still see where it is. And as is Fort Evans. Fort Evans, the foundation of it is still visible. Here's a plan of it. And then this is an aerial photo of that area to orient you. Here is the Outlet Mall, and this is Home Depot, right? And that is the site of Fort Evans. So you can see the tree line outlining the the foundation of the fort. It is privately owned, and it is unfortunately not protected in any way by zoning or other restrictive covenants on the property. In March of 1862 was the first time that the Union occupied Leesburg, and George Fox, the clerk of court, evacuated the county's records down to Lynchburg, which is why they survive. And so the fact that Loudoun County has all of its records dating back to 1757 is really pretty amazing. And it's all due to a man named John Fox. In 1862, in September, the Confederate Army recaptured Leesburg. General Lee took up residence on Harrison Hall. This is a picture of it. This house does still exist on North King Street. And there he held a conference with Generals Jackson, Stewart, and Longstreet to plan their advance across the Potomac River in what became the Antietam Campaign. I don't know what it's. In June of 1864, General Jubal Early and his troops came through downtown after his aborted attack on DC. Being chased by Union soldiers. All told, by the end of the war, Leesburg had changed hands 150 times between the Union and the Confederacy, back and forth. Yes, sir.
It's not really a Leesburg. Can you tell the story of the plans for Antietam and the Cigar River?
I can't. I'm sorry.
I had heard. Anybody else know this?
Yeah, that happened in Frederick, Maryland.
Oh, right.
In one of it was we wrapped around 2 cigars. That was the plan for fighting his army, and somebody discarded it or dropped it. And when the Union Army camped on the field, they found the 2 cigars in the wrapper. And Lee never forgave D.H. Hill, who was the general that he was sending the message to. He was a very good general, by the way. And he had been provost before Evans here in Leesburg. And long story.
Yeah. Question.
Lowest orders.
Yeah, right.
So we have a request just to see the last slide real quick.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
So how did the residents treated under Union?
I have not heard that anything about that the residents were mistreated by either the Confederates or the Union. So I don't know if anybody has any other information. There are several diaries held in the copies held in the Balch. Anna, you want to speak to that?
Yeah, so we have several Civil War era diaries or transcriptions of diaries that are located up in our archives upstairs. So if you have time after the presentation, you're welcome to go upstairs and request those. And we can work together to see if we can find anything about that.
Yeah, so actually one of them was by Virginia.
Yeah, there was a teenage girl who lived in the Harrison house, and her name is escaping me, but she was like 19 years old, living in a house as a guest during the Battle of Ball's Bluff. And so she talks about her recollections of that battle during that time period. So.
Yes, sir.
Is that the same house? I mean, there's a thing out front of the painting, but according to that, there were more generals there. I think all of his generals, according to that, all of his generals were there. And apparently, Lee had a broken arm and he went to a doctor around.
Yeah, the doctor is next door.
Is that the same?
That's the same house. It's also known as the Glenfiddich House today. Yes, on North King Street. Yes, and Lee was injured, and the doctor lived next door. Who?
Around the corner.
Right. Who treated him? Yes, same one. Okay, Reconstruction. Like the rest of Virginia, Leesburg was battered and broke in the years following the Civil War. When I first put this presentation together, and I shared this with my mother, the grammarian that she was, said, "Don't you mean broken?" And I said, "No, I mean broke. Like there was no." Leesburg, of course, had always been a market town. There was never any major industry here, and the industries here in Leesburg always generally supported the agrarian economy of Loudoun County. And so following the Civil War, the proximity to Washington as a market destination for agricultural goods from the county helped Leesburg's recovery. Rail service to and from Alexandria, which had reached Leesburg in 1860 and of course had been suspended during the war, resumed in 1867. This is a photograph of the passenger station, which no longer exists. The freight station is now Fireworks Pizza. But by 1900, the rail line had only been extended as far west as Bluemont, and it never actually went across the mountains. It never crossed the Blue Ridge. There was never a rail line between Leesburg and Winchester. And in the 1870 census, the population had dropped to less than 1,200. So this is the 1878 Gray's new map of Leesburg. So some things to point out, all these blue parcels are either churches or government buildings or cemeteries. So, and a lot of these still exist. Here's the Presbyterian Church. This, you can see the Methodist Church still existed. It's gone, but the cemetery is still there. This was the Methodist parsonage. It's a privately owned house now. This is the Mount Zion Community Cemetery, still exists, and here's Mount Zion Methodist Church. The Episcopal Church was over here. They're now right here. There's the courthouse. You can see the academy is now the clerk's office. Also, we have more streets, right? South Street has been added along with Air Street and North Street. And the Leesburg Turnpike has been renamed Fayette Street, a name that hasn't survived. Liberty Street also added. Is that still Back Street? Okay.
So were these cemeteries segregated at this point?
Right. So yeah. So this was a Black cemetery. I don't know if this was originally segregated. I know that the Methodist Church was initially not segregated, and it was shortly before the war that there was a schism in the Methodist Church over the issue of slavery, and for some time. The Black members continued to worship at the Old Stone Church, but eventually established the Mount Zion Methodist Church and broke away. And I think that's sort of when the Stone Church started to fall into disrepair. Yes, ma'am.
So Patty asks, when was the current courthouse built?
I will get to that, but it was built in 1895. But I will get to that. So economic recovery. So Carlheim, a large Victorian mansion, and this is actually one of the very few examples of Italianate Victorian architecture in the town. It was built for Pennsylvania industrialist Charles Paxton and his wife Rachel in the early 1870s. So this was, money coming in from the north. Paxton, of course, is known as the Paxton House. When the Paxtons had a daughter, Margaret, who died before they did. She died quite young. And when Rachel died, she left the house and her estate. She created a trust. And the house was to be used as a convalescent home for children. And it was used as that for a long time. But then, of course, as advances in medicine came about and there was less need for a convalescent home, the uses for that house changed. Always in keeping with her, a judge actually had to decide whether it was in keeping with her will. And so it became an orphanage, and then it was a daycare center, and there have been a number of buildings added to it for the past 15 or so years. The Ark of Loudon has occupied that property. They recently have moved. I'm not sure what the plan is. This house, the Ark of Loudon never occupied the house. It was used as the Shocktober haunted house for years and years and years. And at some point during one winter, apparently the pipes burst in the house and caused a great deal of interior damage. And so then the fire marshal basically said, no more Shocktober And so I'm very much hoping that the trustees, that the Paxton trustees will find a way to restore this building. They have said that they have a plan to restore the property, but they of course have lost their primary tenant. So not sure what's going on. Yes, ma'am.
I think since we're telling history, it should be known that the ark has been forced off the land.
Yeah.
They haven't moved.
Right. The trust declined to renew their lease. So, yes.
Is that on the national register?
It is. It is on the National Register. So in 1880, the first telephone in Leesburg was installed. And in 1887, the town council engaged the Norris Brothers, a local construction firm, to construct a building at the corner of Loudon and King Streets. This 2-story building cost $1,500 to build. It contained the town offices, retail shops, and a 450-seat theater on the second floor. It's known as the Leesburg Opera House. It was demolished in 1956, and the building that contains Senor Ramon is now where it was. So it was a department store, and now it's been divided up into several shops and restaurants. Electricity was installed in 1891. However, the line only went from West Market to Cornwall Street. So, and the third and present, answering the question from earlier, the third and present Loudoun County Courthouse was completed in 1895, also built by the Norris Brothers. The Norris Brothers were responsible for a lot of the major buildings in town. I will mention this again at the end. The town has a walking tour app, for which I was responsible while I was working for the town. And one of the tours on it is an architectural history tour. And so a lot of the buildings that I talk of in the downtown, Carlheim's not on it because it's not in the downtown, but a lot of the buildings that I talk about in this are on that, and you can get more history about them. And there's also a women's history tour, which does mention the diary of Miss Virginia, whose last name neither Anna nor I can remember right now.
So the Norris Brothers, were they local?
They were local. So they built the courthouse. I think they built St. James Episcopal Church. I think they built the People's National Bank, which is now Lightfoot Restaurant as well.
Did the previous house burn down, or they decided they needed?
They just decided they needed a newer, bigger, prettier one.
Why is Leesburg, did Leesburg ever consider getting city status?
Oh, that's a discussion for another. That's a very long story. In the early 20th century. So Leesburg remained the center of commerce for Loudoun County, which remained agriculture. But agriculture evolved in Loudoun County as dairy and beef cattle became, those industries grew, and corn replaced wheat as the cash crop. In 1917, Westmoreland Davis, the wet candidate, meaning he opposed prohibition, was elected governor of Virginia. Now, Westmoreland Davis grew up in Virginia after his family had lost their fortune in the Civil War. He went to VMI, Virginia Military Institute, on a scholarship, but then attended Columbia Law School, graduated from there, stayed in New York City, and became quite wealthy. And in 1903, he and his wife, Marguerite, purchased Morven Park, which is the estate just north of town. And despite his lack of any previous experience, he took up farming, became very interested in agriculture. And he also founded the Loudon Hunt and served as the master of foxhounds for the Loudon Hunt. But in 1912, he purchased a magazine called the Southern Planter Agricultural Journal. And he used that journal to advocate for scientific methods to improve productivity in farming. So he was elected governor in 1917. And as governor, he oversaw the creation of the state highway system, as well as other improvements and reforms within state government. Leesburg Hospital opened its building on Cornwall Street in 1918. The first hospital was located in a house at the corner of Market and Loudon. It's now an assisted living facility, but that was the first hospital. And then they built this one. This building, unfortunately, was demolished. It was added onto as part of Loudon Hospital for a long time. But then the most recent renovation, which was about 10 years ago, of the Cornwall campus of Inova, they took this down, so it's now a parking lot. I will say, as a historic preservationist, medical buildings are one of the hardest categories to retrofit because of the technology requirements of modern medicine to run all those, all that equipment in when you think about what the equipment in a modern hospital room. So this building is gone. Almost 600 Loudoners served in World War I, and in July of 1919, Leesburg hosted a homecoming parade for the veterans. And in 1922, the World War I memorial was installed on the Loudon County Courthouse lawn. And this is a photo of the crowd. You can see, this is the People's National Bank today. It's Lightfoot Restaurant. One of the tours on the walking tour app is a tour of all the war memorials on the courthouse grounds. If you're interested, discusses when and how they were installed. The interwar years. So Balch Library, where we are here today, opened as a private subscription library in 1922. The first library in Leesburg was established in 1907 in a private home. The Balch, of course, when it opened, was whites only, and it became a public library in 1960, but wasn't desegregated until 1965. It became part of the Loudoun County Public Library System in 1974. It was closed in 92 and the Loudoun County transferred it to the Town of Leesburg in 1994. And in 2000, so 25 years ago, the Balch Library opened as the local history and genealogy library that it is today, owned and operated by the Town of Leesburg. It is quite one of the crown jewels of Leesburg. Leesburg High School was constructed in 1925. This building, of course, still exists. It later became Leesburg Elementary School after Loudoun County High was built on Dry Mill Road. It then became the administration building. Today, it is the Leesburg Senior Center. There are some other county offices in the basement. The Leesburg Fire Company built a new fire station on Loudon Street in 1927. Building still exists today. By the way, whoever was asking earlier, this is the Patterson House. So, 1931, Tally Ho Movie Theater opened. All right, so the most illustrious, most famous resident of Leesburg in our history undoubtedly was General George C. Marshall. George C. Marshall was the U.S. Army Chief of Staff from July of 1939 through World War II until he retired in November of 1945. During World War II, in the spring of 1941, George and his wife Catherine purchased the house known as Dodonna Manor. After the war, I am sorry, I don't know why this is messing up here. Following World War II, Marshall served as Special Envoy to China, Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense. And in 1953, he received the Nobel Peace Prize for the post-World War European Recovery Plan, the economic recovery plan that bore his name, the Marshall Plan. Most Americans probably don't know what the Marshall Plan is, but if you go to Europe today, people still know the Marshall Plan that aided their recovery following the devastation of World War II. He was at Dodonna Manor when he received the telegram notifying him, George Marshall was, notifying him that he had received the Nobel Prize, and he is the only soldier to have received the Peace Prize. He lived here until his death, and he spoke at the dedication ceremony. This is a photo of him on the courthouse grounds when the World War II Korean War Memorial was dedicated in 1956. And again, I apologize for my slide being messed up here that you can't read that. Civil rights era. So first, let me talk about education, civil rights and education. In the late 1860s, the first public school in Leesburg for African Americans was opened in this building on Liberty Street. This is the Metropolitan Masonic Lodge. It is an African-American Masonic Lodge. There were other schools. There were earlier schools for African-Americans, but this was the first public school. And in 1884, the Leesburg Training School opened on Union Street. This building does still exist today. It has been leased by Loudoun County to the Loudoun Freedom Center under a resident curator program, and it's currently being renovated. Loudoun Freedom Center intends to open it as a cultural center, which I think is fabulous. I'm so happy to see this building back in use because as long as I started working for the town in 2002, and this building's always been boarded up. So I'm so happy to see it being restored and back into active use. So this is a photograph of the students and teachers at the training school. In 1930, the school building was expanded to include high school classes, but it was not an accredited high school, and wealthier African-American families sent their kids to high school in Washington, D.C. Because there was no accredited high school for African-Americans in Loudoun County. In 1941, Douglas High School opened, the first accredited high school for African-Americans in the county. For years, the county had resisted building a school for African-Americans, a high school for African-Americans, claiming that there wasn't land. So a group of parents raised $4,000 to purchase the land on which Loudoun or Douglas High School is, and they then turned around and sold it to the county for $1. The county still dragged their feet about building a new high school until they were threatened with legal action. And they finally then borrowed the $30,000 necessary from the state literary fund to construct the building. And this building opened in 1941. After desegregation, Douglas High School, let me go. So in 1954, the public schools were consolidated. Prior to that, it was the Leesburg schools, the Bluemont schools, Levinsville schools, right? They were all consolidated in 1954. In 1958, Frederick Douglass Elementary School opened and the training school closed. Now, the Frederick Douglass Elementary School I mentioned here is gone. That building was demolished to build the existing Frederick Douglass Elementary School on Plaza Street. So after desegregation in 1968, Douglass High School became a middle school, and then it served as the alternative high school as well as a community center. It a couple of years ago went through an amazing renovation and is now a fabulous facility. Donna Taraka is here, who was part of that, worked for the school system. If you have not been to see Douglass High School, to see the Douglass School campus, please go. There are wonderful exhibits and signage explaining the history of that site. And you can go inside, and there are great exhibits inside the main auditorium / cafeteria area. Please go. It's a wonderful, sensitive restoration of that building. And again, a restoration that keeps the building in active use, in a use for which it was originally intended, that of education. Did you have a question, sir?
No, I'm good.
Okay.
Betsy, it was 1968 where the dual school system was about.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
1960.
68, yeah, I was just,
Oh, okay.
I say when you said 1954, Loudoun County Public Schools were consolidated. Well, when you say consolidated in 1954, we're talking about those kids that came from the other communities into Loudoun County High School. So
Okay.
that would be the difference in that.
Okay, I will correct that. Thank you so much. Yes, ma'am.
The family that came for the money and they paid the county for the $1. You know a lot about the family that you mentioned?
Well, it wasn't it was a group of African-American families. I don't know if there's any information at the school about that.
In the amphitheater on the outside, for the countywide league, what it's called, and it has pictures of all the families up there. And Larry Sims, who's up front, there's people that was on the committee to help them figure out the commemoration And also a practice.
Thank you. Okay. So 1968, Loudoun County Public Schools were fully desegregated. So on the legal side of things, of civil rights, in 1933, Charles Houston represented a man named George Crawford. George Crawford was a Black man who was accused of murdering a Middleburg socialite and her maid. They were both white women. And Charles Houston was dean of Howard University's law school. And he was also the first general counsel of the NAACP. And he led the first all-Black legal team in a major case in the South. One of the men who was a student who served on this team, he was a student at Howard University Law School at the time. He served as a researcher on the legal team, was a man named Thurgood Marshall. Mm-hmm. And he was later Supreme Court Justice. And he is credited with saying that the Crawford case was the case that convinced him to focus on civil rights during his legal career. So, given the overwhelming evidence of Crawford's guilt, Houston focused his defense on saving Crawford from the death penalty, which he was successful in doing. Crawford was sentenced to life in prison, and this was seen as a major step forward for civil rights, for a Black man to not get the death penalty from an all-white jury. Right. The other thing, while that was a major step forward, the really groundbreaking thing that Crawford did, or that Houston did with the Crawford case, was that he very carefully documented and exposed the systemic exclusion of qualified Black citizens from jury pools. And a few years later, this laid the groundwork a few years later, the Supreme Court justice opinion that biased jury selection was unconstitutional. Houston was also the attorney that helped that group of Loudoun African-American families threaten the school system with legal action and help them see Douglas High School get built. Sadly, Houston passed away before he saw the Supreme Court decision to declare school segregation unconstitutional. That decision came down in 1954. Houston died of a heart attack in 1950. Did you have a question, ma'am? No, he was not from Leesburg. Okay. However, last year or the year before, Loudoun County renamed the courthouse. Last year. Renamed the courthouse, the Loudoun County Courthouse, the Charles Houston Courthouse, in his honor. Some other steps in civil rights here in Leesburg. In 1961, Leesburg lunch counters in town were opened to African Americans, following the lead of Middleburg. And the reason Middleburg opened their lunch counters to African Americans because they had two very important visitors to Middleburg quite a bit. And they didn't want to look bad in front of these people, being, of course, John F. Kennedy and his wife, Jackie Kennedy, was president at the time. A couple of years later, both the Tally Ho Movie Theater and the Village Lanes Bowling Alley were integrated with little fanfare, just folks showing up and walking in and not being challenged. Unfortunately, in 1965, the Leesburg Fire Company decided to close their public swimming pool rather than integrate it. Here is an aerial photo. So you can see there's Fireman's Field. This is the swimming pool. This is the fire station that still exists today on Loudoun Street. And of course, this is all townhouses now. But they actually filled it in with rock and paved it over rather than integrate it. Balch Library was integrated the same year. And in 1976, John Tolbert became the first African-American town council member. He was actually appointed, but then he was later elected. He was appointed to fill the remaining term of someone else, but then he was later elected. And then in 1992, the I Have a Dream Committee here in Loudoun organized Loudoun's annual MLK March. This is an event that does still happen every Martin Luther King Day. Sometimes it's really, really cold, but they still do it. And they march from the courthouse to the Douglas School down Market Street. And then there's an event at the Douglas School. So I mentioned that the Balch Library is one of the crown jewels of Leesburg. The Leesburg Executive Airport, in my opinion, is one of the other ones. So in 1918, a World War I plane landed in a grassy field on Wallace George's farm just east of Leesburg. He was a barnstormer. He was flying around offering people rides in his airplane, and he landed just east of Leesburg. And by 1930, George's Field had become a privately run airstrip. So this is a USGS map from the 1930s, and you can see the landing strip right here. There's an apartment complex there now. So you can see this is the Lowenbach subdivision. And you can see downtown. In 1950, radio personality Arthur Godfrey, who owned a home west of town in Beacon Hill, what is now Beacon Hill, purchased George's Field, and he gave it to the town on the condition that it continued to be used as an airport. He had a radio show that he broadcast from New York, and he liked to fly his own plane from New York to Leesburg and back, and he wanted someplace close that he could land, and so he purchased the airport and gave it to the town. Oops.
Can I say something?
Sure.
I grew up in Leesburg forever, and I lived on that road, and believe me, it was a big event. One property came every Friday night, and every kid on the street got on their bicycle, and we rode down, and he was really nice to us and waved. So for a small town girl, this was a big event.
Great, thank you so much for sharing that.
Didn't want to stand there, but we all went. And she's too young.
I'll probably tag a lot.
But it was really special. So, I mean, you can minimize it, but it was on Elvis Ferry Road where the apartments are today, so it was really close to town.
Yeah,
What did they
absolutely.
call that road? Old Airport Road for a long time. It was very, very.
Ah.
It was a dirt road.
Yeah.
So again, I apologize for the formatting error here, but in 1961, development had encroached upon this airport. And so Leesburg applied for a grant from the newly created Federal Aviation Administration to build a new modern airport south of town. And Godfrey allowed the town, released them from their requirement to use George's Field, as long as they used the money to the new airport, for the new airport. And so this is a photograph at the groundbreaking of the airport. For you longtime Leesburgers, this is Frank Rafflo, and this is Stanley Hawkins. And those are council members standing next to them. So the new Godfrey Field was dedicated in October 1964. There's a photo of one of the old hangars. And in 2000, the airport was renamed the Leesburg Executive Airport at Godfrey Field. And this is a relatively recent 2001 photo taken by one of our pilots who regularly uses the airport, a photo of the airport on coming in on approach. So, post-war growth. In 1949, Colonial Leesburg was established. This was the first group to advocate for brick sidewalks in the downtown, among other improvements. An additional 1,700 acres was annexed. So this is now a map of Leesburg at that time. You can see Catoctin Circle has started construction. The town is expanding out. In 1959, Leesburg adopted its first zoning ordinance. Dulles Airport opened. While that obviously didn't take place in Leesburg, it had a huge impact on the growth of Leesburg to bring that out this way. In 1963, the Olden Historic District was established. So our Olden Historic District actually predates the creation of the National Register of Historic Places by about 3 years. So the Historic Preservation Act of 1966 created the National Register of Historic Places. The first city in the United States to have a local historic district zoning ordinance that governed the appearance of buildings, of historic buildings, was Charleston, South Carolina. It was created in 1931. So this map, and I apologize, I need a new map because we annexed some land down here. But the green outline is the original boundaries of the town. That's the original 60 acres of Leesburg. And then that shaded area is the current historic district. And then this is another blow up of the historic district. So it encompasses more than just the original 60 acres of the town, but that's the overlay district, the current historic district of Leesburg. In 1968, the W&OD Railroad ceased operations, and the first section of the trail opened in 1974. The last section opened in 1988, and this is, of course, a trail that runs from Purcellville to Alexandria, or Alexandria to Purcellville, whichever direction you prefer to say that it's. Late 20th century changes. Market Station development began. So the area around Market Station, the area along Harrison Street, was the industrial area of Leesburg because it, went. It was along the railroad tracks, and so there were feedlots and so forth down there. And so the town received an urban renewal grant to redevelop this area, and so that's how Market Station came to be. It's a conglomeration of buildings that have been moved to that site from various areas. The freight station moved up from the railroad up to where it is today. An additional almost 5,000 acres was annexed in 1984. All of this sort of purpley gray here, more than doubling the size of the town. In 1986, 138 acres was donated to the town by the Rust family to create Ida Lee Park. And as I was reviewing this in preparation, I realized how old this photo is. Because it does not have the water park on it, and of course we have new bubbles over the tennis courts. So, but this led to actually the creation of the town's Parks and Recreation Department, the donation of this land. New Town Hall was built in 1990. Dulles Greenway opened, again, not directly in Leesburg, but huge impact on the growth of the town. The County Administration Building was constructed in 1995 as well. In 1998, the Outlet Mall opened, bringing 5 million visitors a year to the town. Yes, ma'am. Ida Lee Rust. So it was the Rust family. So in the walking tour app, there is a women's history tour, and Ida Lee Rust is one of the stops on that. So I encourage you to check that out. She's also featured in the Union Cemetery tour as well. Early 20th century changes. So this is what's happened in Leesburg since 2000. We've added 3 elementary schools, 1 middle school, 2 high schools. This is Tuscarora High School on the north side. We've added over 6,000 new housing units, 2 million square feet of retail space, 1 million square feet of office space. So here's some pictures of some stuff that's been built since 2000. 1.5 million square feet of other commercial space, daycares, recreational facilities, that sort of thing. And in addition, of course, Village at Leesburg. And in addition, in January of this year, an additional 400 acres was annexed into the town. Technically, it wasn't annexed. That's a kind of a legal splitting of hairs, but it was added to the town boundaries. And included in that, along with Walmart and At Home and the new Wendy's, is 1.9 million square feet of data centers that are out there that was built when they were part of Loudoun County. So Leesburg today. So we are and have been, as long as I've worked here, the largest town in Virginia. There was a question earlier about city status. The town, as part of the The annexation of the Compass Creek area agreed not to seek city status for at least 25 years. That was kind of like giving up something we weren't ever going to pursue anyway, because it's such a complicated process. Because if we were a city, we would have to take over, we'd have to have courts and schools and all the social service, mental health, mental retardation, housing, all of that. It would be a huge undertaking to take that on at this point.
So another local town is Herndon. What's the population and size difference?
I think Herndon's about half our size. I think Herndon's about 20 in the 20,000s. So, yeah. But we are much larger than a lot of cities. Yeah. I think we would be the 12th largest city if we were a city. So we routinely get ranked on best places to live and best places to visit in the US. Most recently, 8th out of 25 across the United States. So yes, ma'am.
When I was first becoming aware that Leesburg was what it is and all like this, quite a while ago now though, wasn't there in the same area where the courthouse is, at one time when they were knocking it down when I was there, like a hotel?
Yeah. The Leesburg Inn.
Any pictures or anything of that?
I don't have any pictures of this in here, but the Balch certainly has pictures of the old Leesburg Inn. It was where the law library is today is where that was. And actually,
was it a hotel?
It was a hotel. It also had businesses on the first floor and in the basement. In the Women's History Tour, one of the stops on that, I'm about to talk about this, Leesburg Virtual Walking Tour app. So here we have historic highlights and African American history, downtown architectural women's history. Our Union Cemetery tour was put together by a young man as his Eagle Scout project. The War Memorials tour, the Loudoun County Foreign War Memorials, something that's a really long committee title, asked us to do that one. And so we did. And then we also have a public art tour. So in the Women's History Tour, there is the woman who was the first woman elected to town council, and I'm drawing a blank on her name, Thelma. Anyway, but she owned a shop in the Leesburg Inn. She had a clothes shop in the basement, the Clothes Tree. And so there's some pictures. If you go on that app, there's some pictures of the old hotel. Yes, ma'am.
So in addition, on this virtual walking tour app, we just released a Lafayette tour as well. So if you want to see where Lafayette went in Leesburg, we have that.
It looks good.
Thank you. But also there are a few questions here. Okay, so this is going back farther into your presentation. So they asked which empty house on Worth Street housed the Declaration of Independence. If you have a best guess. No,
don't know.
Okay.
There have also been. It's also been suggested that it was actually on Cornwall Street. So
yes, they were saying that in the chat. Is this old stone house the oldest building in Leesburg? Do we have that?
So that's hard to say. I mean, frequently the Donaldson House is listed as the oldest house. I'm not sure of the construction date of the stone house. So it's one of the oldest.
And then the first photo in your presentation and the one that's right there at the bottom of the walking tour app, was that what time period is that from? They noticed that the streets don't appear to be paved.
Right. So I don't know the exact date of this photo.
It's turn of the
century. Yeah. Yeah. So it's clearly before the third story was put on the Loud National Bank building.
Are you still doing guided walking tours in addition to the virtual tours?
So I personally have never done a guided walking tour, but I know that,
Yes.
is Jim Roberts still doing his?
So, Jim Roberts, who is a Leesburg resident, he does a walking tour of Leesburg. He specifically, he'll talk about the history of Leesburg in general, but he also will go through the Black history of Leesburg, as well. From his own personal recollections and
He's
addition.
excellent.
He is wonderful. And then the other walking tour we have currently is Leesburg and Loudon in the American Revolution walking tour. So the Jim Roberts tour is October 4th on Saturday, and then the Revolution one is November 1st, also on a Saturday. And if you were interested in coming, I encourage you to sign up for that or register for the event, because we do have a cap limit of how many people we can take on those tours.
So has Rich Gillespie done any of his recently Civil War?
So yeah, the Rich Gillespie has been, because of the 250th anniversary of the Revolution, he's been very focused on the Revolution, rightfully so, but I'm sure we'll get him back to do the Civil War tour as well.
Right.
At some point.
Okay. So, well, that concludes my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention. And I'm happy to answer any other questions that people may have, or stick around if you don't want to ask in front of the whole group.